Good afternoon, everybody. This is Brian Dayton with the West Virginia Chamber of Commerce, and I'm joined by Lily Barrickman, also with the West Virginia Chamber of Commerce. And we're really excited today to welcome you to this next Business Academy event. And it's Powering the Grid, Understanding Transmission Lines. This is a really important topic in West Virginia. I know there's been a lot of questions surrounding transmission lines and what they do and how it interlays with our 50 by 50 plan that's been pushed forward by Governor Morsi to generate 50 gigawatts of electricity by the year 2050, and also just through the increased demand that we're seeing for electricity, both produced in West Virginia and outside of West Virginia. So we are joined today by Rob Gramlich of Grid Strategies LLC, which is a Washington, D.C. based consultancy that is focused on transmission and power markets for a reliable, affordable, and sustainable power system. Rob has been invited to testify by both parties before Congress, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and state agencies. He has earned awards from FERC as Exemplar of Public Service and the Energy Systems Integration Group for contributions to market design and transmission planning. Rob frequently advises policymakers and industry around the country on grid issues, and he has visited the White House a number of times during the last 7 presidential terms to advise on grid issues. He has served as an economic advisor to FERC Chairman Pat Wood III, who was appointed by President George W. Bush, and was senior economist at PJM Interconnection. And remember, PJM is the regional grid of which West Virginia is a part. He has a Master of Public Policy degree from the University of California, Berkeley, and a BA with honors in economics from Colby College. Rob is also joined today by Zach Zimmerman, also of Grid Strategies, and Zach is the Director of Research and Policy for Grid Strategies. Rob, Zach, thank you both so much for being here. We're really excited for this presentation, and I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you and let you guys take it away.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Lily. Thanks, everybody, for joining. Really good to be here. We love to talk about our favorite topic, which is the grid, as you can see from our fancy slide backgrounds. But I've been working on grids for really my 30-year career. So why don't we dive right in? We'll get your questions ready. We love to take any and all types of questions about it. We won't know necessarily all the answers, but that's why I brought Zach here to help fill in where I might not know. And so with that, let me pull up some slides to kind of talk about a little bit what's going on in the power sector across the United States. If you haven't been reading news story after news story, you might not know, but power demand is growing. It's really just we keep using electricity for more and more things. In Texas and North Dakota, this oil and gas drilling is actually being powered by electricity now. They're shifting over to electricity for that. We're insourcing manufacturing after years of more manufacturing going abroad. It's coming back in to some extent, and we're using a lot more electricity for that. Just everything we use our phones for in daily life at home and at work is using electricity. Some of that's through data centers, but there's a lot of other types of facilities, as you can see here, and the demand just keeps going and going. A few years ago in 2022, we thought we were only going to need 24 new gigawatts nationwide, but now it's looking like 166. This is, a big increase, and the new demand on the system is like we're adding 15 New York cities by the end of the decade to the U.S. power mix. So that's some of the context here, and we really do have a constrained grid. Like the transmission system for most of my career, we kind of had this headroom. We built a lot in the 70s and 80s. We thought demand was going to keep going up at 5% a year. It didn't. So we had some headroom and didn't have to worry about transmission for quite a while, until about maybe 4 or 5 years ago. In most regions, we kind of just ran out of that headroom. And so what happens is if you're trying to add either new load or new generation, to the system, the interconnection of that new load or generation gets really complicated, and it's taking the grid operators 3 times longer to connect it. Um, you have to, build out infrastructure, and that takes time, and supply chains are kind of scarce and expensive. And we're seeing that definitely in the supply. So I know, West Virginia's got some new natural gas-fired generators it wants to build, and just like Ohio, Pennsylvania, and other places. And PJM, where I used to work, the regional grid planner, they're trying to connect some of this because they need new supply to meet demand. Um, is finding it takes longer, and then the cost of that goes way up because it used to cost, the numbers here, $24 a kilowatt to connect a new natural gas generator. Now it's like 8 times that. Um, and it just is a reflection that since we've used up the headroom, you got to expand the grid to connect anything. Uh, and then high voltage transmission becomes really important in here. You don't have to be, have the economics, training or whatever. I mean, I think you can kind of intuitively understand that the large lines carry a lot more power, but there's what we call economies of scale that are massive in transmission. So if you kind of look at the 765 kV lines, the cost of that per delivered amount of energy of under $1,000 on the bottom right there for the high voltage kind, compared to the lower voltage ones, which can be about 4 times that. It just shows that they're building at the high voltage level maximizes the use of our dollars. Much more bang for the buck if you do the high voltage kind. So a lot of places, including West Virginia, are looking at high voltage transmission, and that's part of the reason. And in order to capture those benefits, you really do kind of have to plan bigger and a little bit longer term, as opposed to the kind of the reactive incremental approach that we've been taking of late in the industry, which again we could get away with for most of the last 30 years, but not until but not really this decade. We've run it out, and we got to plan bigger now. The benefits tend to be really high, partly as a reflection of the fact that we're out of this transmission capacity, and also because of those economies of scale. So if you do the benefit cost analysis, like, what do you spend now, and then what do you get back in savings? You find you often around 4 to 1 benefit cost ratio. Um, and often those turn out to be higher than initially expected. This is sort of a modeling thing. This is the way they do the models. You kind of assume every day is a nice blue sky, sunny day when you're doing these models. But what we keep seeing over and over again in the electric industry is we'll get severe weather of one kind or another, a polar vortex, a heat wave, or something. And these severe weather incidents is really when you end up needing to move power, a lot of power, from one state to the neighboring. Could go east to west one day or west to east the next day. In fact, often the same weather pattern moves across the region, and you have the east supporting the Midwest on one day, but then the weather pattern moves into the east and power flows to the east. So it goes back and forth depending on where the center of the weather event is. But that's why we see, often if you kind of look backwards ex post at the benefits of transmission that was recently built, you get much higher benefit cost savings. Now, keep in mind on the cost, there's definitely cost to transmission, no question. But what we pay today is just a small share of it. Like, this is a 13-state region. West Virginia's probably just pay about a few percent or some small ratio of the total. It's really more load pay. So the big load centers around the Mid-Atlantic region will be paying most of the money for transmission. So you share, with other people based on geography. You also share over time. Like, we don't actually even know who the users will be 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now, but the assets are depreciated over 40 or 50 years. So future users, whoever they turn out to be, will be paying a lot. And we have pretty good low-cost utility financing so that the money is collected over that, many decade period. So today's ratepayers get to share it again across the region and over decades of usage. So that's where the costs go, but the benefits can often be pretty immediate. The benefits in terms of reducing congestion and giving access to low-cost generation, those can hit right within as soon as the line is energized. And in fact, in that interconnection case, whether it's new load, like new manufacturing or demand, or new generation, um, that can hit as soon as the line gets planned. Then the planners assume that the line exists for the purposes of assigning them their costs and their upgrade needs. So you can really get an immediate improvement in the ability to connect new load and generation, which is great for economic development, of course, whether you want to build generation or build new manufacturing in a given area. Affordability is really the focus, I think, of most utility executives these days, and policymakers, regulators, Public Utility Commission regulators, state and federal. I used to work at the federal version, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, but West Virginia and every other state has a state economic regulator, and this is really front of mind because retail rates are rising. Part of that is that the grid, the distribution and transmission assets are really old. There's so many of them are 50 to 70 years old, post-war developments through the 50s and 60s that now just have to be replaced, and there's not much way around it. So that's one factor. And then the generation this is sort of supply and demand. The supply of generation is scarce. That's why we're seeing a lot of interest. And, states like West Virginia that say, like the governor has said, you want to, build a certain amount of generation, the 50 by 50. There's definitely a market for that supply. And the markets, the price signals are saying build it wherever you can build it. So those are both causing prices to go up because demand exceeding supply, and then severe weather, and again, hurricanes, wildfires, high winds. Remember the storms down in North Carolina a year or two ago, and you can have icing on lines that can tear down lines. All that stuff is costly, right? And when you got to get the crews out immediately to string back up lines or reconstruct towers, that's really expensive, and that's happening in different forms all over the country, but that's contributing to higher rates. And then electrical equipment, as I said before, is expensive. It's mostly global markets for these things, transformers, towers, et cetera. It's all scarce and expensive. Kind of really since the war in Ukraine, but it hasn't really subsided, partly just because everybody in the world is using so much more electricity for so much more things that the manufacturers of all that commitment are really of all that equipment are trying to catch up. And then permitting is a perpetual issue. State and federal permitting slows down supply to meet demand. So that's why we're starting to see rates go up. You can see in the graph there, the bold line getting up to the right for residential rates starting to inch up in recent years. We had nice flat demand for 20 or 25 years and pretty much flat rates, helped by the fracking boom. Gas fracking really helped keep both gas and power rates in check. But again, we're starting to see rates go up, unfortunately. And so, transmission comes into this picture. It's a really helpful way to provide a platform to meet all the growth. Other countries, I just got back from China. They're building an extraordinary amount of transmission lines, like 800 miles long of 1,000 kV, meaning like higher voltage than anything we even have in this country. And they're really, they basically have a mandate to serve their growing economy and a political mandate to keep their growth going at 5% a year, which they probably aren't going to be able to do, but they know that a key part of it is to build out the grid, and that's attracting the supply and powering their manufacturing, et cetera. So as an economic development push, many countries, including China, are really including transmission. It's an overall, more affordable way than just doing generation. And of course, you can't just do generation unless you deliver it to people, but you don't need quite as much generation if you have a good power network to connect all the generators across a many state area like PJM or even broader in the Eastern Interconnect of the United States. Unfortunately, our development has kind of slowed down to a trickle. About 10 or 15 years ago, we built a lot. We had one good year, around 4,000 miles of new transmission in 2013. Texas was a big part of that. Those central states north of Texas, Kansas, Oklahoma were a big part of that, and the upper Midwest, kind of Great Lakes states were a big part of that. They all had big, ambitious plans. Built a lot, but for various reasons, it's just been slowing. However, it doesn't mean the dollars have not been spent. You can see on the right, the dollars of spending have actually gone up, ever since the turn of the century. And that's really just reflecting what I said earlier, that we're having to spend so much money to replace the old assets that unfortunately all those dollars being spent are really just keeping the existing system as it is. It's not actually expanded capacity. So we do have to spend more and do more to actually build more capacity for the grid. And with that, I think, let me actually just stop. Those are all the slides I was going to share. I'll just make a couple other comments here. I didn't want to be too driven by by PowerPoint, and we'll have some time for questions here. But just one thing to say a little bit more on just how the grid system is planned. The grid is really kind of like the great integrator of all the resources. So whether it's coal, gas, oil, nuclear, wind, solar, geothermal, there is a diverse set of resources out there. They are still, they're still operating and providing power to the system, and the grid is really the thing that allows them all to kind of play their role on the team and integrate so they can produce when they're producing and contribute when they're able to. That diversity of supply really is a strength for this country's power grid. We can see certainly with global events in the Strait of Hormuz, it's nice that we're not using, global oil or much oil at all for electricity because the oil price is set by global markets. But the power system here is using domestic sources, gas, coal, wind, solar. So, that all is working for our energy security advantage, and every other country around the world is trying to do that as well with their power systems. But we're facing what they're facing, which is you can do that only to the extent you have the grid to integrate all those resources and serve demand. And then if we want to build new supply, like the governor's initiative, you really have to get the grid in place. One, I think I mentioned on the gas plant case that it used to cost just $24 a kilowatt to connect a new gas plant. Now it's looking like about eight times that. But that's going to be a real factor if West Virginia wants to build any new type of supply, whatever it is, and whatever the market wants or whatever policymakers want in West Virginia. It's going to be constrained by that grid, and it's going to take a long time unless some transmission gets built. And if you can kind of plan the transmission separate and before the generation specific units are trying to come online, then you have capacity to connect both new generation and supply. But if you wait to kind of the last minute, then it's just not going to be able to happen for 5 years and for much more cost than if get the grid going at the front end. So I think with that, again, I'm really looking forward to questions and discussion. So maybe Brian, I'll turn it back to you. And Zach, feel free to jump in if there's anything I missed or anything else you would add at this point.
Well, thank you, Rob. This has been absolutely informative thus far. What I want to give, I have a couple questions I want to ask, but I want to give everybody on the call the opportunity to ask questions as well. There's two ways to do that. You can either type your question into the chat box or type it into the Q&A box. So while you may be formulating your question or typing it out right now, let me go ahead and just kind of get started with one. So we're in the midst of coming up on the primary elections in West Virginia, and affordability is the buzzword that we're hearing all the time right now. There's been a lot of discussion about the cost of these transmission lines. How's that cost lay over to residential customers? Can you talk a little bit about that, the cost of building these?
Sure. I mean, everything's expensive these days, right? So it's really a as compared to what question. And with transmission, often what you get is it gives you access to the least cost generation portfolio mix. And actually, the bigger dollars are really on the generation side. I mean, in terms of percentage of your bill, if you break it out in terms of what you get in the month from your utility every month, you're paying more for generation. So if you pay a little bit more for transmission to get access to cheaper generation, that's usually a pretty good deal. And again, a lot of the transmission and distribution charges that will show up on there are really just keeping the system in place, to stay reliable. But there is the opportunity now to spend a little more to get a better deal overall on your, generation plus transmission plus distribution cost profile.
Thank you.
If you don't mind me jumping in just really quickly, just to build off Rob's point, we've done studies in the past that kind of emphasize this point, showing that on average, a transmission portfolio that is built out maybe adds about 1% in terms of the transmission component of your bill, which is roughly somewhere between 10 and 15% overall, whereas generation is approximately 60% of your electric bill. And a transmission portfolio that's well planned can reduce that generation portion by I believe it's about 6%. So you add maybe $1 a month in terms of transmission costs, but can reduce it can provide savings closer to like $20 a month or something like that. So really significant savings as Rob said, compared to a scenario where you're building less transmission and are forced to build out a lot more generation.
Yeah, Brian, I might, if it's okay, add a little bit. When we do those studies that Zach mentioned, sometimes it's surprising because if you go and look at the direction of the power flow, a lot of times the big savings are going in the other direction from what you originally expected when you built the line, like across the Eastern Interconnect, and just think roughly of, I don't know, sort of like Iowa, Kansas, that's sort of the western edge all the way to the East Coast. It's all part of one connected grid. There are a bunch of lines that kind of go east-west through the Midwest. And the prevailing flow, like most of the time, it's kind of west to east. There's a lot of cheap generation out in the middle of the country moving to the coast and population centers. But you see, just depending on the weather of the day, and sometimes the more severe weather incidents are like this, that a lot of the high value is when it's actually going east to west, and we'll send 10 or 13 gigawatts, like, more power than West Virginia has altogether, from the mid-Atlantic into the Midwest, when they need it. And, we're even in the mid-Atlantic sometimes keeping the lights on in Louisiana and places like that, just because of, the capacities there. And, everybody is kind of keeping everybody else's lights on. That's the advantage of a power network. If we were all just isolated utility, small footprints, like we would all have much more rolling outages because we just have to, turn the system off for a few hours here and there. But we can keep the lights on by moving the power across systems. like that. So it's kind of interesting if you look around the country at different transmission lines. Often the power flow is going contrary to the prevailing flow because on any given day it can go the other direction. They're all bidirectional and multi-directional lines. They flow by the kind of the magic of electricity according to the path of least resistance. They flow where the demand calls for it.
Thank you. We have some questions that are coming into the queue, so I just want to go ahead and start with the top one. What is your view of federal permitting reform legislation, especially limiting the time and/or number of lawsuits, and how's that lay in with transmission lines?
Yeah, there's a lot of talk in Congress right now. The uh, House Republicans introduced a few bills related to those timelines, to the National Energy Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, and the associated environmental impact statements, as well as some provisions to change the way the Clean Water Act is done, particularly with regard to pipelines, but it affects transmission too on, I think it's sections 401 and 404. So there's a number of bills from the House Republicans, and then the Senate Environment and Public Works, EPW, committee is considering those. And I think there's a pretty decent chance some of those things will be like judicial reform and like speeding up the amount of time, or like reducing the amount of time at which you can challenge a NEPA or EIS, which just reduces the litigation risk on project developers. So I think there's a pretty good momentum. As much as Congress can agree on anything, like the prospects are decent for speeding up reviews of infrastructure.
Thank you. Now that's fantastic. Our next question we have is how much coordination exists between new generation providers and transmission capability to facilitate the reduction of the cost of new transmission?
Yeah, well, that's a really interesting question. I think what the questioner is asking about is, a new generation developer coming to the system and saying, here's my generator, please connect me soon and, at a reasonable cost. And the utility transmission owner might say, well, it's going to cost you, $100 million to connect your generator there, and it might take you 5 years. And that can be really frustrating because the generation developer might not really have any information or basis to know whether that was a good location or there would have been some better location. So I know FERC has tried in years to make their increase the transparency so that there's more information about here's a good or better or worse place to connect. And some of the utilities are probably more I don't know, helpful on that or encouraging, but it really does help to kind of proactively plan. That's one of the benefits of having PJM there as a regional 13-state entity to plan according to some kind of rational expectation of future load and generation to figure out where the most reliable and beneficial lines would be.
Thank you. So we have next question. Have there been improvements on minimizing line losses?
Well, some of the technologies are better on that. I think generally with there's AC lines and DC lines. AC lines, most of the network is the alternating current interconnected grid where power kind of freely flows everywhere. And in that case, you get lower line losses with the very high voltage lines, 500 or 765 kV lines. You have very low line losses. I mean, they're really small. I mean, within the region that we're talking about over multiple states, you might be losing 5% of the power. So it's an extremely efficient system still, but it does matter. So the higher voltage have lower line losses, and then increasingly there's more direct current DC lines, and they have very low losses. They tend to be the favored technology these days for if you want to do very long distance lines. And there's some like, 500 or 700 mile long lines out in the west and central region that use HVDC for that reason, because you can just go so far with so little losses.
I I will also jump in here and say that beyond HVDC, there's also been some improvements in conductor technology itself. Traditional conductors were steel core. That's kind of what was the original conductor put on the system. And in the past 20 years or so, there's been the development of carbon core conductors, sometimes referred to as advanced conductors or high performance conductors. And um, deployment of those can improve line losses by about 20% in terms of reductions. So to Rob's point, we do have a very efficient transmission system, somewhere in 3 to 5% of losses currently, but we can maybe get another third of savings deploying some of the new modern technologies like HVDC or high performance conductors.
That's fantastic because that's a question I've always wondered. I was actually approached by somebody a few months ago that was showing me some of that new technology, and I was like, that's fascinating. I did not know that was really existing, considering I'm not in that line of work. Another question I have for you guys is related to the governor's 50 by 50 energy plan. So, Rob, I think during your slides you mentioned, West Virginia, we have around 15, 16 gigawatts of generating capacity right now, which is more than West Virginia uses. And the plan is to get to 50 gigawatts by the year 2050. I think a big way we're going to get there is by natural gas power generation. But the question really is that's going to require a lot of exporting that power beyond the borders of West Virginia. Obviously, we want to bring more development here and use more of it here, but that would be exporting a lot of that. Can you talk about the benefits to West Virginians by doing that?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, there's a lot of states. I mean, I've worked in a lot of states that are net export, and a lot of states that are net import. I live in Maryland, and we've always been a big, like a 40% net import state. Um, but I've worked in Montana, Wyoming, Iowa, the Dakotas. Even Illinois is a big net export state. And so, I mean, those states tend to be very interested in the economic development that comes with it, the jobs, both the manufacturing, like the construction, and then the operation of the power plants, as well as the transmission. All of those have tax base. The generation plant and the transmission lines generate tax revenue for local communities. Um, and Obviously having the plentiful supply in your home state has some advantages and reliability benefit. Yeah, I mean that's usually the appeal, and a lot of states are. I mean, for as long as I've been in the business, that's been something that's an opportunity that's been sought out by a lot of states. I think the reality is, I mean, every state, including my state of Maryland, Maryland's probably the biggest net import state in the country. Um, and like everybody would love to have our own generation in Maryland. We just we can't put it anywhere. There's nowhere to, we're a tiny state and there's nowhere to put it. And other states that are net import states would probably like to have it if they could put it anywhere.
I will I'll just add on this point. It is really important to have the transmission to export that generation to really get the value out of those investments. Just as an example, from Winter Storm Fern that happened in January, we saw that a lot of the gas production kind of in the Marcellus region was not able to deliver its energy to like the Maryland area that Rob was talking about. And so that's one of the highest value time periods for a generator is those extreme weather events where the grid is in stress conditions. And so it's important for these generators, if you're building a lot of generation, to have that delivery to other regions that are importers, to take advantage of those times when they can provide the most value to the system overall. So it's one thing to focus on building a lot of generation, but you still need to make sure that the power is able to get where it needs to go. after it's online.
So I've got a real quick question, then I'm going to dive into another question. One of the next questions we had is, will we be able to get copies of these slides? And I do want to remind everybody that the recording will be available, will be widely distributed. But Rob, you know,
Yeah, happy to send these over. Yeah, I think you might already have them, but I made a couple tweaks this morning, so I'll send them to you.
perfect, thank you. So anybody who, just to remind anybody who would like that, just let us know at the chamber so we can go ahead and send those. And the next question we had is, do you see an increased potential or interest for smaller distributed generation to reduce the transmission needs?
I mean, there's a lot of talk about that, and there's interest, and there are some things happening with distributed energy resources. It might be solar or batteries on site, or could be other things. If the customer wants that and values it, often they're willing to pay for it. It doesn't necessarily increase their own resilience and reliability because they have to be able to like physically cut themselves off from the grid. Like any of us could put a solar panel on our house, but still, if the power goes out, we go out, unless you pay a whole lot more money to actually be able to physically island yourself. So it's a little bit more complicated than most people think. So the distributed energy resource question sometimes is not always as satisfying as people hope for. I guess we'd all love to just say goodbye to the utility and not have to pay their bills, but it doesn't usually end up working out very well. And overall, I mean, I do think, some of the on-site resources are getting more cost effective, and we will see a fair amount of that. Um, it really tends to be more the solar, like places with really good solar, like Australia has a whole lot of an incredible amount of rooftop solar because they don't have trees so much and they have obviously tons of sun. So it tends to be places like that that are doing it more, but not so much, mid-Atlantic, Northeast, Midwest areas.
So I want to go back to the technology about the kind of the advanced transmission technology that's out there. You know, what can you talk a little bit more about those technologies, but also just the cost benefit ratio of those? What costs do those have in them?
Zach, why don't you go ahead and take that?
Yeah, no problem. So there's a handful of different technologies under the umbrella of advanced transmission technologies. You'll hear of a suite of tools called dynamic line rating, advanced power flow control, and topology optimization. These tend to be software or sensor-based technologies that kind of dynamically impact the operation of the grid. So dynamic line rating uses wind and ambient temperature ratings to in real time change the line, how much power can flow over the line, because if the wind is blowing, it cools the transmission line more than what the like original rating was set to be, and you can actually flow more power through the line. Advanced power flow control is able to kind of redirect to reroute power around constraints that may be there. And then topology optimization, you can think of kind of like a Google Maps of the grid. It gives you real time like congestion updates and allows you to reroute power flows around areas where there are constraints. So that's kind of the grid enhancing technology section. Those technologies are very cost effective. They're very cheap compared to traditional upgrades. So a new transmission line can have a significant price tag. Though, as Rob said, the benefits are often 4 to 1. But for grid enhancing technology, because of they're usually sensors or softwares, they're usually much cheaper and can provide faster savings. So it's often a good complement to building transmission is to deploy those in the interim, kind of as like a bridge solution. And then we also talked briefly about the high performance conductors. Within that category, there's like two main types that would be carbon core conductors and superconductors. Superconductors have much more limited applications, probably in like denser urban areas where land is just really expensive and you need a solution that can carry, 10 times the power of lines today, but is tends to be more expensive. High performance conductors have probably much broader applications. And as I said, they use a carbon core instead of a steel core. So that center strength of the conductor is lighter and stronger than steel. And so you can string up those wires on existing towers, and it allows you to double the capacity in the existing corridor without having to, rebuild new transmission towers or anything like that. So you save project costs there, despite the conductor being a little bit more expensive. So you're paying a little bit for upfront for additional conductor costs, but like long-term savings are can be significant. So uh, we think that these technologies all work well together in concert. We're going to still need transmission lines to, like I said, like deliver power to places or to connect to new generation where there's not lines today. But some of these new advanced transmission technologies provide faster solutions to add capacity. And so that could be really important for thinking about load growth from manufacturing or data centers, but also for relieving, constraints on the grid right now, and getting more generation online quickly.
Yeah. And they give a little flexibility and headroom. I mean, we work with a lot of the vendors of those, but they don't ever really claim that they are alternatives to new lines. They're just trying to help make the existing system more efficient and avoid, reduce like congestion costs on the day-to-day operation of the grid. So they're not really alternatives. Sometimes people bring them up in the context of siting, like a permitting of a new line, and it's not really it's just kind of a different category solving a different problem.
Thank you. So for everybody on the call, we have one more question that's in the queue. I just want to make sure everybody knows that in case you do have a question, now's the time. Additional question. But one questions about burying 765 kilovolt lines to protect view sheds. Is it possible? Does that technology exist? And again, cost benefit to that.
Well, undergrounding is very expensive. I mean, traditionally over the years, the rule of thumb most people used was sort of a tenfold cost increase to bury a AC line. The delta is different for high voltage DC direct current lines, and I think it's more close to like 2 to 1. And some of those costs might have come down some, but it's still a huge cost increase, and you have to find somebody to pay for that. So I don't know of any buried 765 kV lines. Zach, what's the highest that you're aware of?
There may be some 500 kV lines, but it's very uncommon. From like an engineering and physics standpoint, you start to run into barriers around heat removal for the line, as well as there's something called a reactive power, which is essentially the voltage and current needed to support power flows on the line. And underground, you have issues with those long lines that make it essentially it's not done anywhere that I'm aware of. So there are underground lines that are buried at higher voltages, but as Rob said, those are HVDC lines. So when thinking about undergrounding, that's kind of like the technical and engineering like and or physics feasible way to do it. For a 765 kV line using AC power, it's just not something that's done.
Yeah, and just in my non-engineering brain, the way I think about it is like it's one thing to bury a distribution line in your neighborhood because it's a very, very small voltage. And so, but when you deliver a lot of power over a line, it literally just heats up. And the heat removal issue means like if you had a high voltage line surrounded by dirt, it's going to get extremely hot and damage the line. And so somehow you have to remove that heat. And if it's strung up in the air, then it's naturally just dissipating the heat into the air. Um, And so in a way, overhead lines have this, natural cooling mechanism, which is, nice. And you kind of need that. And, it also kind of explains why superconductors, where you have this like, flowing coolant going along the line is why that's helpful. And you can vary those superconductor lines. But otherwise, you're stuck with the heat if you have a big AC line surrounded by dirt.
Well, thank you. I have one more question because we at the West Virginia Chamber, we love jobs. That's what we're all about is more jobs, more opportunity. Can you talk a little bit about the jobs that are needed to build these major transmission line projects?
Sure. Well, we've done a lot of work over the years with the IBEW. A lot of the transmission is built by IBEW, but there's a lot of different contractors and different labor sources. But they love it. There's a big industry around the country of putting up the lines. There's training facilities around the country. A good way to get folks into the trades and do a good, well-paying job. And of course, a lot of times it's in order to connect big new manufacturing or generation. There are a lot of jobs associated with those, both construction and ongoing operations. So it really is. I mean, electricity is such a critical input to almost every business these days. And it used to be that everybody was tolerant. I mean, back when any of us were born, you would have 3-day outages. People were just used to it. Businesses could operate and all that, but no more. I mean, people really depend on reliable power now. And so as a foundation for any type of economic development for any state, you really have to have a robust grid. I mean, so many manufacturers or other economic interests and job creators are really looking to make sure they've got low cost, reliable power, and that really begins with good, strong grids.
Well, thank you. And just kind of follow up there. Do you have an idea kind of what the percentage is? You have in IDEW obviously is organized labor. What you're looking at as far as organized labor involved in these projects, unorganized. That's just something that my experience in West Virginia is always a question that comes up. That's where I was kind of curious about what that would be.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a range. I mean, obviously, different states have different amounts. I mean, the transmission sector is like there's been a lot of agreements over the years between utility officials and whatever labor source they use, and often that cuts across different states where they operate. So uh, it often depends on that, but now there's a lot of like private contractors. A lot of utilities will just go to outsourced uh, contractors who use whatever labor is available. So it's kind of hard to generalize.
Sure. Well, that's fair. Um, I don't see any other questions in the Q&A box. I just wanted to go ahead. Were there any final thoughts that either one of you had before we wrap a really fascinating presentation? Make sure if you had anything else you wanted to add, please do.
I think that's all I got. I really appreciate the attention. We always love to talk about grids and happy to follow up if folks have any follow-up questions, but appreciate the opportunity today.
Well, thank you both so much. I just want to also thank everybody who joined the call today. We will be getting this. This has been recorded, so we will be getting this recording out and available to all of our members because we get a ton of reactions from these as we send it out to our members in our various news updates and alerts throughout the chamber. So this has been extremely informative. Thank you both so much for doing this, and I hope both of you have a happy Easter and a great weekend.